This is the On Humans podcast, a show which makes new research about humanity more accessible to everyone and more meaningful to the big questions about who we are. I'm your host, Ilari Mäkelä, and I wanted to start today's episode by reading a comment from a listener who said that the podcast is great, but one thing hasn't been covered yet: humor. It's an essential part of our human condition and would be worth an episode, unquote. Now, it was very easy to agree with this comment. I mean, our lives are just full of laughter. Everything from serious comedy to nervous laughter in a conversation or when hosting a podcast episode. So, what makes us laugh? Why do adults laugh at witty jokes while children laugh at the simple pleasures of the peekaboo game? These are topics that I was very excited to cover with my guest, who is a poet and a philosopher of humor from the University of Vienna, Mira Magdalena, Sickinger. We start this conversation from the social role of humor, potential origins of humor in human society, and we go all the way to the tricky politics around joking and even the therapeutic effects of the humorous attitude. And as we do this, we will touch upon many intellectual giants, from Sigmund Freud to Immanuel Kant, seeing what they have to say about humor. And whilst we do cover a couple of silly jokes, be warned, we also do end with a very weighty reflection on how humor can serve as a window, perhaps even a beautiful and inspirational window onto the human condition itself. So there's something light and something very weighty here. I hope that you enjoyed this, and we'll get right to the episode. But before we do, two very quick things. The first one is that I love getting these kind of messages, here's something about humanity that hasn't been covered yet. You should cover it. If you have something like that, do send it my way. You can do it via a form that's in the show notes. And so this one is on humor, and what will it be in 2026? Well, it's up to you, so do send me your thoughts. Now, another thing that comes up when reflecting on the fact that this is the last episode of the year is it has been a wonderful year for the show. It has been by far the most successful in terms of listener numbers and in terms of the budget. And so I'm much more confident than I have ever been in the show's history at this time of the year in saying that the show will go on. And I'm very much looking forward to what the next year brings. There are some very exciting things in the pipeline. So thank you for everyone who's been listening. A very, very warm thank you to everyone who's been supporting the show at patreon.com/onhumans. I couldn't afford to do this without the people who support this monetarily, and I wouldn't be doing this without people who actually listen to this. So thank you so much for tuning in. Merry Christmas if you celebrate that, and I hope that whoever you are, wherever you are, you have a great holiday season and a very, very good start to 2026. Now, let's go. Mira Magdalena Sickinger, welcome to On Humans.
Thank you so much for your invitation.
So as all jokesters know, humor can be a great way to lighten up the mood, but telling a joke is also risky. And you actually write in one of your articles about how the joke is not only risky for the teller, but also for the people who laugh. You might be laughing at the wrong moment, you might be laughing at an inappropriate thing. Do you think that that is one of the reasons why humor can be such a great social bond when it does work well?
Great question. Yes, as you said, joke communication can be risky for all participants involved. We don't know what will happen when a person starts telling a joke. They say, "Have you heard this one?" And then we might be in for a ride, and normally we can't just leave. And it can result in embarrassment for all parties involved. There are a few theories that engage with the fact that there is some sort of alliance that emerges from joke communication. Simon Critchley suggests that joke teller and recipients enter into a tacit social contract, a consensus about the social world as a background of the joke. And two aspects play into that idea. One, that a shared understanding of what counts as a joke, as joking has to be there. And two, a shared social world the joke is referring to and playing with has to be there as sort of common ground. But this is very broad and general. I think it makes sense. And there is a theory by Ted Cohen that places much more emphasis on that feeling of intimacy that can be created between the people who are involved in a joke performance. The effort that the recipient has to make in order to understand the joke teller is described by Ted Cohen as something like the acceptance of an invitation. And the recipient has to understand that the joke teller is telling a joke and has to engage with and attend to the joke performance to be even able to get it. And in successful cases, this might create a cooperative and communal feeling of intimacy between teller and recipient, which is more than a routine act of understanding one another. That is Cohen's claim.
Yeah, so it's not just a cognitive, you said something, I agree with it, but it's actually a deeper form of intimacy because we have entered this alliance of understanding a fictional world. I have accepted your invitation.
Exactly.
And somehow we survived the potentially embarrassing moment together.
Exactly. So there is understanding a joke performance involves a response which is both cognitive as well as affective, I would say. I would agree. And of course, certain information and knowledge must be shared by the participants. That concerns background knowledge, but also beliefs, attitudes, or similar. So this implies that there is a risk involved for also the joke teller that recipients will not get them, which might be a frustrating experience. I mean, I don't know about you, but you might have had an experience where you attempted to tell a joke and you felt like your audience didn't get you.
Too, I've had plenty of those in my 32 years.
Yes. But instead, if the recipients get the joke teller and perhaps even share their intention, laugh about the joke, then this might draw them closer. So as we said in the beginning, there is a risk involved for all the participants. We don't know what to expect, but we are asked to respond. And consider the feeling where somebody's telling a joke to a group of people and they are all responding with laughter, but you are not responding with laughter. That's a weird feeling, right? You feel like you're the one who is left out. You didn't get it. Maybe you lack certain background knowledge. Maybe you didn't find it funny. And then you feel, I think, strongly disconnected from the rest of the group.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we can go a bit more into the nitty-gritty details of the joking moment. Before we do, though, I wanted to ask your thoughts on something that I thought about when preparing for this episode, which is this idea of intimacy.
Yeah.
And the idea that this is a particular way to combine the cognitive and the affective, the clever with the emotional way of bonding together by using language. It made me think of Robin Dunbar's theory about the origin of language. So this is one of the kind of big theories in anthropology and psychology about how did humans come to speak. And the very short story is that our group sizes got too big to do what chimpanzees and bonobos do to create social intimacy, which is they groom each other with their fingers. And the story goes, humans, our group sizes got too big, we couldn't anymore groom with our fingers, and therefore we groom with words. And somewhat surprisingly, I haven't actually seen anything about joking or humor in Dunbar's writing. He puts it, he kind of stops the story there and then talks about gossip, for example, as one way to then, create this kind of social alliances, etc., beyond what physical grooming allows you to do. But for me, it sounded like, well, this is the place for the joke. I mean, if we have to groom with our words, it would invite the idea that maybe not fully formed jokes, but maybe humor in some sense might actually be not a kind of fancy elaboration on the basics of language, but actually very close to the root of language. Hugely speculative, and nevertheless, I wanted to put this idea to you and ask any thoughts on this potential link between intimacy and the very origin of language.
So what I would certainly agree with is the fact that jokes have a long oral tradition, like they're told and retold similar to fairy tales. And Agnes Heller claims that jokes may be the last genre of oral cultures to have survived the Gutenberg galaxies.
Oh, interesting.
About the origins of language, of course, they're very like diverse forms of humor. And humor and laughter may have facilitated language development. Like ha-ha kind of humor can be quite basic. However, generating even a simple narrative joke requires, advanced language skills, symbolic conceptual thinking, social perception, and these kinds of things. But expression of amusement or like gesture, repetition, surprise, these elemental features of humor, I think it makes sense to consider them as very important for like language development and social interaction and communication.
And it would make perfect sense that, joking as a form of let me tell a joke, I have a good one, is not the starting point. The starting point is something much lighter about using subtle humor or maybe not so subtle humor in language. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. But let's bracket then that away and continue with this dynamic about joke telling. There's actually a joke about this. The salesman joke. Maybe we should get the listeners make sure that they know what's the salesman joke. You can why don't you tell it, and then we can discuss the potential implications of it.
Yes, I think it's a great example. There are actually two versions of this joke, aiming for opposing but equally original punchlines. And the joke goes like this. There is a group of salespeople who had been traveling the country for many years, always sharing the same carriage in the train and always telling one another jokes. And over the years, they had become so familiar with their jokes that they just used numbers to indicate them. So one of them would say 23 and they'd all laugh, or 89. And so one and all laugh. And so in the story, there's a young person joining the salespeople's group. And after a few journeys, deciding that they would take part. And in a moment of silence, they, took their shot and they exclaimed, 97. Nobody laughed. Silence. And the young person naturally wondered where they could have gone wrong. They'd chosen the wrong number, whatever. And then they got the answer from one of the salespeople, which was, one must also know how to tell a joke.
Yes.
And then there's this alternative positive punchline, which instead goes as follows. Okay, the young person exclaims the number, takes the shot, and then there's a lot of laughter. And one of the salespeople turned to them and said, "That's a good one. We hadn't heard that one before." I think the joke illustrates the very process of linguistic establishment of meaning and its limitations. So the fact that we are conferring or reducing fictional content to a number might strike us as an unusual practice. However, abbreviations are in fact a common form of meaning conferment in most languages. And what the joke also illustrates very effectively, I think, is the emotional or psychological consequences of linguistic disquietudes. So the negative punchline where the salespeople respond to, "Come on, what was that?" And one must also know how to tell a joke, articulates a response of uneasiness that stems from the corruption of a language game that has been established within this group. And the positive punchline instead, that's a very good one. We hadn't heard that one before. Random number. We don't know what it refers to. We have no fictional story in the background. And this evokes a feeling of uneasiness that stems from the realization of the practice's arbitrariness, right? We can imagine this group of people, and it seems legitimate that they are telling each other jokes. They have been sharing the same carriage. They go to work together. They know their jokes. And maybe they also became a bit tired of hearing them, but they still wanna, have fun with each other. And so they developed this kind of shortcut, this kind of code, but they established it and it works for them. And maybe they really know the story it refers to. maybe they really recall in a moment, 14, that's that joke, right? So, and that's that punchline. So, ha ha ha, that's my response. Yeah, that's a good one. Thank you for reminding me of that joke. Um, but then if there's a new person, a new coworker going with the same train because they live in the same like small place and they are curious. They don't really know in the beginning what's going on here. Like exclaiming a number is not funny. But then they realize, it's a sort of code. Okay, now I have listened to this for a couple of times. I might be able to participate. I might have observed enough.
I might have cracked the language game.
Exactly. I I might have heard enough and I might be able to participate in a language game. But if they're exclaiming this new number and then with the positive punchline, it must be a number that is new, that is newly introduced. For the salespeople who were already part of the established group, they cannot know the fictional story it relates to, because the young person is not telling a whole story but just a number. So they are just imagining some sort of new joke that has been told, and they appreciate the way it has been told. Maybe they even appreciate the fact that the person has worked out how their game works and they want to applaud them for that. But it feels I think it feels super weird, the second punchline, because we just lack the story and we can't say that. That's a good one because there is no story, there's just a number.
Yeah.
So the fictional characters displayed in the joke stories are torn out of their linguistic entanglement, but also I think we as the recipients of the joke are torn out of our linguistic entanglement in our reflection on its consequences.
Yeah, and if that's the positive side of what this kind of what can this can reveal, there is, I guess, also the negative side, which is, well, in reality, that's not how jokes work. It's not that we just hear the full joke and then we laugh. There's actually, in a joke, there's always a kind of it needs time. In reality, all jokes take time. They start one way and then there's the punchline and they go another way.
Yes.
And there's a whole industry. I mean, at least since Immanuel Kant, I saw that he tried to work with this puzzle of like what exactly happens. And there's been a whole industry ever since in philosophy and psychology to try to really kind of see like what is it that makes this an enjoyable thing, and what happens in time? How does a joke begin? What happens afterwards? And what does this tell us about the human mind? There's so much out there that we won't be able to do justice to that whole industry. But I've noticed that a pretty common theme that seems to run through that is that there is typically, in joking in particular, in humor in general, there is some kind of tension. And then there is a release. Right? And this idea of tension and release comes up a lot in different forms. And there's actually a really lovely line from Kant, who said that laughter is an affection arising from the sudden transformation of a strained expectation into nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that there's kind of great expectation. And what does it come down to? Nothing. Because the story that we were kind of following in the beginning of the joke is destroyed by the punchline, and it just becomes absurd by the end of it. So that was Kant's way of understanding it. What about you? What happens, do you think, in this moment where the punchline arrives, and what does that tell us about how the mind works?
Maybe before I do that, maybe I can say something also about Kant. So Kant counts jokes among the agreeable, not the beautiful. And for him, they do stimulate our faculties, but primarily imply a physical stimulus. And Kant argues that music and laughing material are two different ways of playing with aesthetic representations, or representations of the mind through which, in the end, nothing is thought.
Okay, so silence in thought is what comes after.
Yes, however, they can be lively, amusing, if only physical.
Okay, what does he mean by physical?
Yeah, like he really thinks that this, like our laughter response is a very physical thing that comes from the belly. It's
Yeah.
really, it's really like that.
Yeah, it's actually interesting because Kant is such an abstract. I mean, I don't speak German, unlike you, so I've only read Kant in translation. But it's very, very complicated text, and it's very abstract. It's not very uh, embodied typically. But
Exactly, which is
in this part, when
surprising.
he
Yeah.
talks about joking, it's very embodied. It's about the belly and about the excitation in
Yes.
the body and the muscles, and so it's a very unique moment actually for Kant.
Yeah, it's quite surprising. Um, so he specifies that laughing material, which are jokes or could be jokes, must contain something absurd in which the intellect therefore can find no satisfaction. So no realization, no new knowledge, no happy end that goes beyond a physical one. Um, and Kant also explains that the objective representation that comes with this strained expectation is not the object of pleasure. However, the playing of representations contributes to the balance of the faculties. So normally, it's also a balance of the faculties is the ideal situation for appreciation of aesthetic content. So yeah, if your faculties are evenly balanced, then you are in a good state.
Interesting. That reminds me of something that comes in philosophy even before Kant. So Kant, writing in something 1790, already in the medieval times, Thomas Aquinas, not talking about joking in particular, but talking about humor, he had a very vivid, I really like this, he had a very vivid image of why humor and laughter are what he thinks good things. I mean, he was a very theological thinker, but here it's not that they bring us close to God or anything like that. But he said that the human mind, when it's worked, is a little bit like a bow, which is stretched, bow like bow and arrow. And just as any bowman will tell you, you cannot keep the bow always strained. It will become a very bad bow. What you have to do is sometimes let it rest, and that when we laugh or when we find something humorous, the bow of our minds kind of becomes relaxed for a moment, and therefore allows it to be agile again in the future. I really liked it as it was such a visible metaphor and something I did not expect to find in medieval theology. But there's some resonance there with Kant, right? If this balance of the faculties and the unstrained bow.
Yes, true. I mean, Kant is normally classified as one of the thinkers who had a theory of incongruity of humor. And Aquinas, to my knowledge, was amongst the thinkers who classify humor as a kind of play.
Okay.
And I think Aquinas agrees with Aristotle that humor and other forms of play provide, as you said, occasional rest. And pleasure in forms of humor and playfulness are a sort of rest for the soul.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So just as so humor for them would be a verbal extension of the fact that we, like so many other animals, like to play.
Yes, something like that, I guess. Yeah.
But you said that Kant has a different theory, which is he's in the bucket of incongruity theories.
Exactly.
Can you open that a bit?
The theory of incongruity illustrates how jokes thwart our expectations by bringing together apparently incongruous schemes. So they work with the typical setup punchline structure of jokes, where the setup creates certain expectations, which are then violated within the punchline. And according to such an account, expectation, irritation, and surprise are the fundamental elements that serve the pattern of joke narratives.
So there, in the beginning of the joke, there is the brain is doing what it always does, which is trying to predict the world, trying to guess kind of what's happening.
Fitted into our established conceptual schemes.
Yes, so using what we already know to trying to predict what happens, and what happens is not what we expected. It's something completely different.
Yes.
And that is the moment of laughter. Yes, I see.
Yes.
But how separate do they need to be? I mean, I think John Dewey John Dewey, who was a 20th century pragmatist, and he had one piece on humor where he suggested that we should think about it as starting with the peekaboo play with a child,
Yeah.
where all you need for a young child is that there is a kind of playful tension. Where is the parent? Oh, there they are, and the child erupts in laughter, and that this
Cute.
is like the root. This very cute indeed
Yeah.
moment is like the root of humor. But then he does say he's very open to the incongruity theories as a theory of how, for example, complicated jokes work. But he was kind of, I don't remember what exactly he said, but I think the idea was something like this is in the same way as, the poetry and literature are complicated examples of the very simple act of speaking. In the same way, incongruity might explain how joke punchlines work, but it all comes down to play with tension, expectation, and something sudden happening, which makes the young child laugh, and in a more complicated way, after a good joke, might make us adults laugh. So what do you think of Dewey's kind of, you can have both play and incongruity in the theory of humor?
Dewey's theory or thought here actually sounds like a version of the relief theory of humor. And this is also Freud's theory of humor is categorized as part of the relief theory of humor.
Okay.
So in Dewey, the laughter marks the ending, right, of a period of suspense or expectation. And we have this sudden relaxation that might be comparable to a sigh of relief.
It's almost like the laughter is almost the kind of steam leaving the boiler.
Yes. Yes.
Well, then we have three. We have the play theory, we have the incongruity, we have this relief theory, which at least in Dewey's reading actually could maybe include both of those, play and incongruity. Do you have a favorite yourself?
I mostly work with the theory of incongruity because it is the most productive if you engage with philosophy of language and like the cognitive aspect, because it very much relates to the structure and the content of the scripts, of the narrative of the joke. Yes, so it's the easiest for me to engage with that. There's actually a fourth theory, the theory of superiority.
Okay.
I don't find it very helpful.
Okay. Well, with this very promising preamble, if you can give a quick summary.
So it says something like, when we laugh about something, we feel superior to it because we have overcome that failure, or something like slapstick works where somebody slips.
Because we didn't slip, they slipped.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I personally can't find that much amusement and pleasure when people just, when people fall over or trip, or they might get hurt. I just
Yeah, if your friend just slips by you, the typical thing is not to start belly laughing of how superior my balance
exactly.
is.
I think it can happen that you laugh, but I would say if you laugh in such a situation, it's because you're stressed, and then maybe it's more like a relief
Yes.
thing, right?
Yes, that's a good point, actually, because, and I think that's a very productive point, because one of the things that was kind of at the back of my mind, and I thought maybe we don't have time to discuss it, but it kind of kept nagging at me that actually a lot of laughter is nervous laughter. And we'd probably be doing it right, during this conversation, both of us. Why? Do you have any thoughts on that? Why do we nervous laugh?
Yeah, super interesting question. I think there are so many different laughter expressions. And even if it's in direct response to a joke, we can never really know what the laughter is expressive of. It must not be that it stems from like a very authentic realization of the punchline. It could also be some form of applause, something like that. We're just polite people. Maybe it's just only a little like chuckle, or maybe we have a heightened we have a heightened tuning to like a funny atmosphere, and that changes drastically how much we will laugh or whether we laugh. And consider somebody telling you a joke in a different setting, and then the same joke, a different person tells it to you in a different setting on a different day. And one time you might have found it like boring, nothing special. And the other instance, you might have found it highly amusing. Of course, this has to do with the performance.
Well, that's the salespeople joke
Yes,
right there.
true. True, true, true. I mean, the performance of the joke teller is, I think, an important factor. But what the laughter is expressive of can be very, very, very different and diverse things. Nervous laughter, yes, I think very often it can be expressive of just, releasing some tension, creating a vibe or an atmosphere that is friendly or something like that. But it can also be quickly turn into the opposite. It can be irritating if you talk to a person and it's something serious, or you just don't expect them to respond that way, and then it doesn't have that kind of effect. So yeah, it's interesting to think about nervous laughter. Of course, I have not engaged with it in depth because it's not something that is directly attached to a joke response. It's something separate. But if you engage with laughter as a conversational phenomenon per se, that's something that you would definitely have to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's such an obvious point, but it's really worth saying in this conversation is the fact that it can create laughter in general. It just can be a way of creating a safe, friendly
Yeah.
atmosphere. But there was one thing I did notice, which was from a neuroscientist, V.S. Ramachandran, and he has a theory called the false alarm theory. The very, very simple idea is that, you see a lion, you scream an alarm call for the whole group. There's a lion coming. And you realize it wasn't a lion, it was a shadow of your friend or something. And the shouting, the alarm call turns into laughter, telling people, don't worry, there was nothing actually dangerous out there. And so in this theory, laughter is fundamentally a way of saying it's okay, like everything is fine. There's no danger out there. Any thoughts on this kind of false alarm theory thinking? Does it resonate with anything you've been thinking about, or very, very far from the philosophy of joking?
It is a bit far from the philosophy of joking, I have to admit, but I think it's interesting. I will look into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the politics of joking a little bit.
Yes. Yes.
So there's, of course, one big risk in joking is that you make an offensive joke. Of course, many jokes can be used purposefully to offend, but then there's also the risk that you didn't realize, like you said in the beginning, you don't always know all the implications of the joke. It's a very, very, I think, difficult topic because the whole point of joking is that you suspend the rules of everyday logic. You create an imaginative world where kind of things can just be very different than they are. And on the other hand, it's so obvious that it can be a way of promoting stereotypes, of seeing very mean things about others and then being, it was just a joke. So you've written about this, you've engaged with the literature around this. How should we think about this tricky balance between the freedom that there is in joking and the obvious problems with making an inappropriate, offensive joke?
Yes. Yes, that is very important. So So the one thing is that we have accounts that point to the risks of humorous speech to reinforce prejudices and stereotypes. And on the other hand, we have accounts that see humor as a potential tool that may subvert oppressive structures even. And then maybe we have this third thing in the middle where we say, okay, joking is a sort of safe space where we can engage with taboo topics, risque topics, topics on the edge, and just use this sort of tool of communication to reflect on these kinds of topics, and maybe a little bit into the direction of relief theory of humor, where we say we have these oppressed thoughts, like the major examples are sex,
Yes.
death,
Yes.
and within humor, or humor gives us a sort of outlet to make them come to the surface, and we can respond to them with laughter. And in this moment, we don't have to repress these thoughts anymore. So this is like maybe as I said, maybe the third approach.
It's a good categorization. I like it. So basically, there are the clearly punching down jokes. Then there are the kind of punching up, like the classic example would be the East German jokes about Stasi.
Yes.
But you've also wrote about feminist humor, queer humor as a way to reclaim or to rethink or challenge oppressive structures. And then you have the middle space, which is this place where you're kind of edging at the boundaries of what's acceptable, and that's a way to discuss also sometimes things that cannot be discussed easily without some humor.
Exactly. Let me maybe expand a little bit on like the punching up forms of humor. So we could say that laughing at power is a tool to expose its contingency, and that what appeared to be fixed and oppressive becomes a bit shaky. And that's a great moment. There is a great theory by Bing and Scheibman, who propose a model of blended spaces that transcends generic scripts that we have so often in joke narrative. And we have those generic scripts because they are efficient. So there's a reason for that. Joking often plays with stereotypes because these are some sort of like common ground, shared beliefs. And oftentimes they even get twisted and thwarted in the punchline. So they don't always have to be affirmative. And these authors argue that the type of humor that results from blended spaces can be subversive because of the creation of new possible worlds, situations that suggest alternatives to the status quo.
So they're a way to challenge our mental models or the
Exactly. Existing norms that might even marginalize some groups, as it is in reality. And they propose a joke by performance activist Robin Tyler, who was a comedian-born American comedian active in the years, I think, 1960 to 1980, which was the first queer comedian on national television, actually. The joke goes like this: if homosexuality is a disease, let's call all in queer to work. Hello, can't work today, still queer. And I think what the joke seems to accomplish by blending the cultural pathologization of homosexuality as a disease with labor legislation and the activity of calling in sick is to show that homosexuality is indeed inconsistent with the social implications of the notion of disease.
Yes, yes.
Which I think is quite effective. And in this way, then the blend undermines the authority of homophobic expectations.
What about then the punching down jokes versus the blended spaces where the punching up jokes, great example. Let's leave it aside for a moment. Let's look at the tricky boundaries between the comedian who just wants to talk about taboo topics versus someone in the audience who says, hey, that's just offensive. We're not going to solve that problem during the next 5 minutes. But if we pause and think about that very kind of blurry line, there's one frame to think about it that you've written about is joke capital.
Mm-hmm.
What is joke capital and how can it help us how can it shed any light on this very difficult and real problem?
True. I mean, this is not one of my theories. Joke capital is something that is presented as a concept by Wilk and Gimbel. And it targets the question, when is one morally responsible for the problematic content of a joke? So they basically claim that freedom from moral judgment for a joking act is purchased using joke capital. So there is a specific price to an individual joke. And this price depends upon three things: the joke itself, the base price is determined by how hurtful the joke could be. The sticker price concerns the context of the group targeted by the joke. How vulnerable are they? How clever is the joke? How embedded is the stereotype played upon? And the third price element depends on the specific context in which the joke is told. I think that's the most important part. Like, who is the teller? Who is the audience? What is the setting? What are the relationships among them? And this establishes the true cost of the joke. And then we can assess whether the joke teller has the joke capital at hand. Like, think about, I think the third part is so important, because when we think about the situation that we are at the Christmas dinner table, and then we have our, not mine, but reactionary sexist uncle telling his unimaginative jokes. Like, I might say your capital is quite limited. Generally, it's the joke teller's responsibility and risk to decide on the appropriate time and place for a joke performance. Like, you are putting yourself out there with a joke. And the experienced and sensitive joke teller will evaluate beforehand whether a certain joke will be understood and or accepted or even appreciated by their audience, or whether the narrative features content that would inhibit a recipient to respond to it in a humorous way for moral reasons, political reasons, religious reasons. But it's not always such a sharp line. Sometimes we have some degree of acceptance of joke content that even goes against our beliefs, right?
And sometimes we laugh and then regret or feel uncomfortable.
Yes, true. You are caught up in a situation where somebody tells you a joke, you do not know what you expect. And you trust this person, you accept the invitation, and afterwards you reconsider, like, okay, like, what have I done? This is not something I would have normally laughed about, but the situation and the person, and so you have been made a complicitor in an quote unquote evil game. And what I also want to say is, the tellers of jokes do not necessarily always grasp everything that is implied by their jokes. Because normally, when we're telling narrative jokes, I cannot control the interpretation on the part of the recipients. And there may be more levels of meaning to my joke. And the recipients might get some elements that are inherent in my joke story that I didn't even intend. And I think that's also important.
Last question about the politics of humor has to do with the way that jokes and humor, they can be very good tools for change, as we've discussed. And, there was a time when I was reading East German history, and I started collecting the East German jokes, because there were so many of the Stasi jokes, and therefore I was very happy to find that there was also a meta joke in East Germany, which was that there are three kinds of people. There are those who make jokes about the Stasi. There are those like me who collect jokes about the Stasi, and then there are the people who collect the people who make jokes about the Stasi. So clearly the Stasi, because the kind of bleak background point there is that they did literally consider making jokes about the government and about Stasi was a crime.
Yeah.
You could actually be put to jail for it. And in a much, much milder sense, humor is often the first line of defense when someone in a group starts to misbehave.
Yeah, true.
Like, this comes up a lot in anthropological literature, by the way, with egalitarian hunter-gatherer groups who don't have clear hierarchies. Very often in the discussions around them, when someone starts to try to get a little bit too cocky, often like a young, ambitious man who's trying to get a little bit too, in your face, the first thing people do is laugh, is make jokes about them.
Yeah.
That's typically the pattern. And it can escalate to very serious things like, banishing them from the group. But it starts with jokes, which starts with humor. And I think the question that both of these points, the East Germany point and this much milder social dynamic point, they both show that humor can be very powerful. It can do a lot. Why do you think humor can be indeed so powerful? Why is it feared by the Stasi? Why is it so useful in a social circle as the first line of defense when someone starts to behave in a way that is not accepted? Why is humor? Why does it have that power?
Yeah, very good question. So as you said, political subversive use of humor, of jokes, has a tradition that demonstrates its impact on real social circumstances. And jokes about the Stasi are a very good example. Jokes about the Stasi told in the GDR during the communist regime, as regime-critical jokes, were viewed by the Stasi as subversive propaganda and could lead to imprisonment, which are in fact real-life consequences, as you said. And this means that such jokes were indeed regarded as a threat, as having potential political impact. I think the interesting thing about verbal humor in this sense is that it seems to move between fictionality and reality in a very interesting way. So the fact that these are like playfully constructed scenarios, they give us some sort of like liberty, but they can bleed into reality in such a way that we see things from a fresh perspective. And this is a very powerful tool, of course. And we can also meaningfully connect a funny fictionalization with a serious reality. And this is something that jokes allow us, and that can be an effective tool in political aims.
Yeah.
One other thing that I want to add that goes a bit into another direction, but I haven't said that before when we were talking about offensive humor, is that in some cases, even offensive jokes can potentially function as therapeutic or subversive forms of reappropriation or like humorous self-referential practice.
True, very true. Well, you mentioned therapeutic there, and I that was actually what I was going to go to next, because everything we've discussed so far has been somehow related to the social dimension of humor. And indeed, humor is like discussed, we started with this point about humor being a great social bond, a way of creating intimacy, perhaps the way, to groom in a group size too big for physical grooming, whatever. But all of this, whether it's social bonding, whether it's politics, it is all about many people. But humor can happen even in solitude. And so Freud, in one of his pieces on humor, mentions a criminal who is, quote, being led out to the gallows on a Monday, and remarked, "Well, the week's beginning nicely." And, maybe the criminal said it out loud as a joke for the people watching the gallows, but you could easily, we can easily imagine that just being a very, a certain kind of temperament would lead someone to cope with life's difficulties by mumbling to themselves, "Oh, the week's beginning nicely." And I thought that was a great, there was something, I think the observation just that humor can work in solitude with a lot of therapeutic effect. That in itself, I think, was insightful from Freud, and something that maybe we should discuss to complement all the social, political that we've been discussing.
Yes, true.
there's a lot of these. It's not just Freud. There's a lot of people who talk about the therapeutic effects of humor. Uh, you actually quote John Morrill in one of your papers, who makes this very philosophical indeed, saying that, quote, comedy encourages. So now we're thinking of someone watching a comedy.
Mm-hmm.
So when watching a comedy,
Mm-hmm.
this encourages an emotional disengagement not only from the protagonist's problems, but from our own and from the problems of the whole human race. We are liberated from ordinary concerns about what is here and now and real and practical, so that we may laugh at our own situations and at the human condition. So this kind of laughing at ourselves and laughing at the human condition, perhaps with other people, perhaps alone, that seems to be a big part of what humor can do.
Yes, I would agree. I mean, I would even agree from a very personal perspective. I mean, I'm narrating to myself all the time, and this is very linguistic. So I'm having a conversation with myself. And sometimes I even have to laugh about myself, like when I comment some things that I'm doing, and then, I have there's a failure or like an attempt that doesn't work out, and I'm frustrated, and then my only way of dealing with it is with a humorous comment.
Yeah, and I see myself doing this kind of, not always, but on my better days, I when things go wrongly, I turn my internal comedian on, and it can work wonders. But this taps into really, I think, a deep philosophical almost a tradition. And one of the people um, who has written about this is Thomas Nagel. He's one of the great American philosophers of the late 20th century, and he has this. Let me try to to summarize a kind of grand essay in 1 minute. So he says that the human condition has something absurd about it. And for him, this is very similar to what, like, for example, Albert Camus has written about, and this really smells of French existentialism, but he takes it to his own direction. And he says there are two, I'm quoting, there are two inescapable viewpoints that collide in us. And the two inescapable viewpoints is, on the one hand, now in my own words, on the one hand, my life is important. Of course, like, things in my life, like even little things, they're very important. I cannot live a life without taking things seriously. That's what life is like. And on the other hand, I can always zoom out, think about the stars, think about the fact that it doesn't really change anything. And he says that there is the life is kind of absurd because we can never really fully reconcile these two. There's never really a full answer to this balance of, on the one hand, you have to make it to the meeting, I'm late and I have to really try. And on the other hand, who cares about the meeting? I mean, like, the sun is going to explode one day and it won't remember whether you made the meeting or not. And what for Nagel, the solution to this is to live with the irony. He actually has a really great way. He finishes this by saying that if there is no reason to believe that anything matters, then that doesn't matter either, and we can approach our absurd lives with irony instead of heroism or despair.
I mean, the absurd is definitely another very specific concept within humor theory, which, as you rightly say, Albert Camus also engages with. I think I have a funny story to tell, because when you're quoting Thomas Nagel's The Absurd, there's also this part: a mouse is not absurd because it lacks the capacities for self-consciousness that would enable it to see that it is only a mouse. And yesterday, I have a personal story. Yesterday, I picked up a set of very cool 80s Italian Memphis Milano teacups via Marketplace. Like, Marketplace Willhaben in Austria is a way where you buy things from private sellers and you go to their homes I think it exists everywhere.
Yeah,
I
yeah, a
think
bit
it's
like Facebook Marketplace.
yes, exactly. I think it's great.
100%. And you, by the way, meet funny people. You meet funny people.
Exactly. You have I was I was so many times I had these uh, like crazy absurd conversations also already in the chats with these people, with these sellers, and somehow I want to collect them and make something out of them, but then of course copyright comes into play. So I don't
Yes.
know if it will be possible. I don't think so. But I think it's great. Like it's very environmental and also makes great conversations.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyways, so I went to this market um, place seller's home, and while she was wrapping the cups, I bought them. They were in perfect condition, all good, 50 euros. And she wrapped them for me and put them in a bag. And there was a small picture on the wall of a rodent with a speech bubble. Am I enough? And I thought it was so cute and touching. So I said to the seller, "Oh, yes, the little hamster is enough. You are enough." And, and instead of appreciating my empathy, the person corrected me, "That's a guinea pig." But you know, the little rodent doesn't care if
Yeah.
what we label it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And indeed, Nagel has. I think it was that might have been a direct quote you mentioned earlier that mouse is
I think so. Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
the. Let me see if I find it. It was I have it somewhere in here. Um, a mouse is not absurd. Yeah, here it is. A mouse
Mhm.
is not absurd because he lacks the capacities for self-consciousness and self-transcendence that would enable him to see that he is only a mouse. If that did happen, his life would become absurd, since self-awareness would not make him cease to be a mouse and would not enable him to rise above his mousely strivings.
Am I enough?
Yes, he would have to return to his meager yet frantic life, full of doubts that he was unable to answer, but also full of purpose that he was unable to abandon. And of course, this is, according to him, the absurdity of the human condition.
Yeah.
And his joking way of saying, but this is a little bit like that the classic example of absurd is when it includes discrepancy between pretension and aspiration. You are being knighted and your pants fall down.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what life is like. You know, you're trying to be so serious, but actually the pants fall down. Anyway, anything to add to life is absurd? Let's laugh about it.
Ugh. Um, so generally, I would say that that can be a good approach, and humor in that way can serve as a productive tool for resilience, for coping. I have a very good friend of mine is so good at this, and she always she's my inspiration when it comes to this because I feel like I didn't grow up with that kind of attitude that I always tried to when there was some tragic situation or difficult situation that I could immediately switch into a humorous attitude that could rise me up, lift me up from that place and give me some sort of a meta view. But I'm still learning and developing that kind of competency, and my friend is very good at that. And shout out to Lizzie.
I have a friend like that very much so in my life also, yeah.
And I mean, Lizzie had some serious instances in her life happening, and yeah, especially then you have that kind of competency. I think it's very admirable and in fact very productive because in fact you go on a sort of meta level and you have a meta view on the thing, and then you might be even able to come up with an intelligent next step to approach your situation instead of just getting lost in the drama of it all. And I think this automatically creates a pragmatic and aesthetic distance in a way that can either lift us above the, the narrative and can give us some sort of meta view and allow us some meta analysis. I think this is similar to how we respond to fictional novels, for example.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's a great place to come to an end. So my final question always is, how has all your work shaped your outlook on humanity?
Yes, that's the question, right? uh, no, so what I've come to realize that apparently we enjoy entertaining one another. Mm, and joking is a shared and performative practice. And we see that, like, as you pointed to Dewey, with children and the peekaboo game, children mimic joke telling very early on, even when they don't fully seem to grasp the jokes they're telling. It just seems to be a deeply rewarding feeling when others laugh at our jokes because it makes us feel understood. And I think humans really want to be understood. Mm, and having others listen and attend and react to what we are saying is very important to us. And plus, I think there is also fundamental joy in provocation by humor, in humorously breaking taboos, humorously challenging the status quo. Humans want to be entertained and entertain one another. And, otherwise it wouldn't have resulted in such a big industry. And I think humor also gives us an alternative tool for understanding our world, which is an alternative to, for example, empirical facts. So it can be a very insightful tool for reflection on our social circumstances, on the world we're living in.
Mira Magdalena Sickinger, thank you so much for all your work and your time today. This was great fun.
Thank you so much for the conversation and for the invitation.
Okay, so that was it for today. Thanks for sticking with us until the very end. As always, if you like this, please subscribe to On Humans, and if you want to spread the word, do give the show 5 stars and share it with someone who might enjoy it too. I wish you a very Merry Christmas if you celebrate that, and a very happy holiday season and a new year. There will be a couple of special episodes coming up in this feed, something quite exciting around the turn of the year, so stay tuned, and more regular episodes coming up in January. Until then, take care.